Future Warrior, Earth's Children. Chapter 2. The grass was tinder dry, the moisture long since baked out of it by the sun's harsh rays. It was the end of the dry season. No rain had fallen in the parched river catchment for many months, and life was at its hardest for both plant and animal. Yet despite the hard times, salvation was literally on the horizon, with the first signs of the coming monsoon, or wet season as the locals knew it, beginning to appear. A change in sea level temperatures and winds saw warm, moist air begin to sweep in from the Indian Ocean over the vast expanse of the Kimberley region in the northwest of the Australian continent. The result was a buildup of dark, ominous clouds across the late afternoon sky. The distant clouds split by the occasional brilliant burst of lightning, the luminous streaks reaching across the length of the storm front. The electrical show was followed a few moments later by the deep, distant rumble of thunder, the sound of promise of what was to come. For now, though the land remained in the grip of the dry, and for its plants and animals the routine of daily survival continued. Amongst the dry grass, there was a sudden explosion of movement, the dry grass rustling slightly. From between two clumps of grass emerged the pointed face of a large monitor lizard, commonly called goannas by the people of the arid continent. The monitor paused, listening to the distant rumbling with interest, the lizard recognizing the sound as a sign that the lean times of the dry were nearly over. Known to science as Varanus panopti, an Argus monitor, its common name was a yellow spotted monitor, a name that reflected its appearance, its skin being yellow with a dark background of spots. The effect making the lizard appear almost two-toned due to its darker back and lighter underside. At over 5 feet, the monitor was large for his species. He was now large enough to be at the top of the food chain, being far too big for any bird of prey to tackle, even the wild dingoes of the area being wary of his powerful claws. He had ruled over his territory for 2 seasons, surviving seasonal flooding, seeing off challengers, and breeding with the females that inhabited the area. He was at his physical peak. He flicked his forked tongue and tasted the air, passing it over his vomeronasal organ in the top of his mouth, immediately sensing the increase in humidity in the air that confirmed the message that the sound of the thunder told him. He also sensed something else, a strange scent that in the nearly 15 years of his life he had never encountered before. Like all monitors, he was both intelligent and inquisitive. It was one of the characteristics that made the monitor family so successful. He tasted the air more furtively. A new scent could be a new opportunity for food. Guided by his highly sensitive sense of aromatic taste, he set off through the grass, heading confidently in the direction of the smell. He had just climbed up a dry creek bank when he heard a sudden noise. "Oi, wake up, bozo!" He froze at the sound. The scent was strong and clear, but he couldn't see its source over the clumps of grass in front of him. Without hesitation, he reared up and stood on his muscular back legs, his tail propping him up. Standing over a meter tall, he could now see clearly, his excellent binocular color vision allowing him to pinpoint both food and threats at a distance. At once he saw something moving. Some type of animal was in a large clump of grass a few meters in front of him, something big. He immediately gulped air into his lungs as a precaution, inflating his already impressive figure, the process also causing him to also issue a formidable sounding hiss. He waited for a long moment, claws at his side, ready to repel any attack from the strange animal, but none came. Issuing another long, deep hiss, he deflated himself before lowering to the ground and reversing course. Whatever the animal was, it was too big to make a meal out of, so he set off in search of something more appetizing. "Did you see the size of that lizard? It was huge." Stalker smiled behind his EEA helmet. "Yeah, I know. That's why I warned him. I wanted him to stay out there rather than come in here with us. Unless you would prefer the extra company, Link?" Lying next to Stalker, Link shook his head. "Not bloody likely. I'm fine with him outside. I thought I was going to have to go to my Z8 if he kept coming." "You would compromise our position over a lizard?" "Of course not." It's silenced. Stalker barely managed to control his mirth at both the mock outrage in Link's voice and at the thought of having to stop Link from shooting the lizard. It probably would have taken a direct order. With the excitement over, Stalker and Link settled back down to resume their silent vigil. They had been lying in the well-concealed position amongst some clumps of dry grass for the better part of 4 hours, and still their quarry had not been sighted. Despite the growing aches in his legs, Stalker knew that patience was the cardinal virtue in this mission, and they would hold position until they received the word. As he waited, Stalker constantly flicked his eyes back and forth over the terrain to his front, while next to him Link did the same with his much keener sniper vision. Stalker felt at home in the savanna landscape, the scrubby floodplain very similar to the ones he had hunted feral animals in during his youth. It was harsh terrain, the temperature topping well over 40 degrees Celsius in the shade during the middle of the day. Not that there was much shade to be had. The trees were for the most part sparse, consisting of small acacias and larger eucalypts, both largely devoid of the heavy leaf cover they would produce only after the monsoon rains came. Closer to the main river course, where there was more moisture locked under the sand and a few permanent pools, the trees were greener and numerous, dense undergrowths of tangled vines, shrubs, and thickets, giving the patches an almost jungle feeling. Further out, however, closer to where Stalker lay, the numerous channels only ran during the seasonal floods, when the river broke its banks and spread out to be at times several kilometers wide. Now, however, they remained dry, the gray-colored earth resembling concrete, and nearly as hard. The network of channels reminded Stalker of a long-abandoned system of trenches from a forgotten war, like the ones he had once visited in Europe. Some ran for kilometers and were several meters wide, as well as being deep enough to conceal even the movement of vehicles. Not that anyone would be crazy enough to try moving vehicles through here, Stalker thought. The grass was in places a meter high and hid unseen pitfalls and trenches carved in the rock-hard ground by the whims of the floods, the holes being more than large enough to seriously damage almost any vehicle. The treacherous ground meant that any vehicle would be unable to travel better than walking pace. Not that walking was any better, Stalker mused. The hard gray earth was turned into incredibly thick, glutinous mud at the slightest touch of water, the area also being part of a large pastoral cattle property. This combination of soft mud and abundant cattle meant that every square foot of ground bore the unmistaken round dimples caused by cattle hooves, all now baked hard. This turned even the deceptively flat parts of the flood plain into a nightmare of uneven footing that made anything faster than a careful walk almost suicidal. The risk was made worse by the concealing nature of the grass, which itself often contained little tower-like structures of mud built up around the plant's fibrous center, formed by the effect of flowing water. All in all, Stalker had to rate it amongst the harshest, and yet strangely alluring, places he had ever seen. There was a sudden burst of communications traffic in Stalker's ears, the sound snapping his attention back on the operation in an instant. Alpha 2-1, this is Australia's lead. Green light. Say again, green light. Stalker acknowledged and turned to Link. This is where the fun begins. Stalker and Link both rose to their feet, their carefully concealed hide disappearing as they emerged into the biting sunshine. Stalker took a deep breath and swung his rifle up, feeling the firmness of the weapon's molded grips. It felt good to be alive. All right, boys, they're out there. Let's get them. Terra Nova, move up. Behind Stalker, a wall of black, suited soldiers rose up from their concealed positions in the dried-up washout and moved to follow their commander. The 21st Terra Nova was once again going into harm's way. As they moved towards their objective, the green scrubby line that marked the edge of the main river course, the assault troops spread out into a long skirmish line, keeping apart so any incoming fire would not endanger more than 2 men. They reached the first clump of thick greenery on the edge of the semi-dry river system, and pushing through it, descended into the first of the narrow channels that made up the main river course. The men moved silently. Only a few small splashes through a shallow, stagnant pool in the channel, and the men's footsteps in the damp sand marking their passage. The staggered line of men, all subconsciously keeping as low as possible, pushed through the first channel and into the clumps of grass and uneven ground beyond, the men being forced to keep one eye out for the enemy and one eye on their footing, more than one stumbling on some unseen hole or a lump of earth. Stalker had just himself stumbled on a rock-hard clump of grass when contact was made, a long burst of red energy fire erupting to the left of the line. As the burst swept over the line, the assault troops went to ground, the black figures instantly evaporating from sight in the tall, scrubby grass. Contact heavy weapon, 100 meters. Confirm Kilo 2-1. Contact left, move to engage. Immediately, the distinctive, throaty sound of ASBRs filled the air as the assault troops returned fire. Stalker popped his head up to take a quick glance before again dropping out of sight as more red rounds whipped through the grass. The firing was coming from a patch of thick greenery off the left, the weapon well concealed amongst the dense foliage. Already he could see from his unit locator display in his command spec EEA's HUD that his unit commanders were moving to engage the enemy. Papa 2-1, join Kilo, give me a base of fire on that weapon. I want fire superiority, push to secure. Lima, Mike, push left, watch for any stragglers and secure the flank. All other units swing right, search and destroy. The Terra Nova assault troops returned fire intensified, the bushes and trees that concealed the weapon's location being cut apart by bolts of blue impulse fire. The enemy weapon wasn't silenced, however, and from within the foliage bursts of red energy fire continued to sweep the area, forcing everyone to keep their heads down. With the firefight raging, the majority of the units disengaged and dropped into the next channel, below the level of the fire. Using the channel as a pathway, they moved around to the right, all the time watching the banks above for any ambush. Stalker, Link, and the rest of the company command unit, CCU, arrived at a break in the channel, the narrow channel emerging into a wider section of the main river course, the position already secured by the leading units. Stalker realized this was a point where this branch of the main river course divided into 3 smaller channels, including the one they had been advancing down. Behind in the distance, the firefight continued to rage. He came to a snap decision. Lee, stay here with the lead unit and anchor the middle channel, and watch yourself. Once they realize we have them trapped, they'll be coming down your throat. Understood? With a hand signal, the new lead unit pushed ahead, Stalker letting 2 more units pass before moving the CCU to follow. Lee Waters was the new company intelligence officer, CIO, of the 21st Terra Nova. A veteran unit commander who had served in the Mars campaign. Stalker had chosen him personally to replace the previous CIO who had been revealed to be an intelligence branch operative. Stalker had wanted a no-nonsense replacement, a man who had an impeccable record of loyalty to the Terra Nova, and he found that man in Lee Waters. Waters had served alongside Stalker's friend and commanding officer, Assault Commander Richard Donaldson. A gruff man in his late 40s, Waters had a reputation for straight talking and the air of a grizzled veteran. His face bore several prominent scars, and ever since his appointment to the post of CIO, rumors have spread about the origins of the scars, with stories ranging from bar fights and disputes over women to combat injuries and torture. What the truth was, only one man knew, and he wasn't talking. Hammer 7-6, this is Anvil 2-1, over. This is Hammer, send. Hammer, we are in position. Strike, say again, strike. All received, Anvil. Good hunting, Hammer out. Stalker flattened his body against the ground and waited. He had spread his men out along the opposite bank of the river course in a long skirmish line, secreting them just below the crest of a low slope that rose away from the river. He had left several more units in blocking positions along the river course itself, the 21st Terra Nova now being spread out in a roughly horseshoe-shaped position across the width of the river catchment. It was a blocking position, a trap that now awaited prey. As Stalker waited, he knew that at that very moment, several battalions of the 76th Infantry Division would be moving forward to sweep the river system. The pattern of their advance being designed to funnel any enemy forces in their path into the net created by the 21st Terra Nova. All they had to do now was wait. The wait didn't last long. Only a few minutes had gone by when a small group of fast-moving, lanky figures emerged from a river course and headed directly towards the line of concealed Terra Nova soldiers. Despite having seen Deimos warriors numerous times since Earth's first contact with the alien race, Stalker still found seeing them alive and moving an intensely unnerving experience. He felt the same tension, verging on fear, in the men around him, even the hardest veteran regarding the approaching Deimos with healthy levels of caution. The aliens moved fast, unnaturally fast to human eyes. They carried powerful long energy rifles, and their normally grayish skin was heavily coated with some type of camouflage cream. Stalker flicked through his EEA's visual modes, noting that the cream coating also blocked some of the aliens' body heat from the EEA's infrared sensors, Stalker opting to remain on standard vision enhancement mode. The aliens came on blindly, clearly unaware of the threat to their front. They had come within 25 meters when Stalker gave the command to fire. The grassy slope erupted with a fusillade of impulse fire, the onrushing Deimos being cut down without being able to fire a single shot in return. As the last Deimos fell, the Terra Nova got to their feet and swept through the killing ground, a few shots ringing out, no one taking any chances in ensuring that the Deimos warriors were down. The Deimos bodies were quickly policed and dragged over the slope out of sight. Then the Terra Nova soldiers returned to their concealed positions to try to repeat the process. Waters was just considering shifting his position in the riverbed, one of his feet having begun to fall asleep, when he caught a glimpse of movement. Without even looking, he knew the men around him had also seen it, an invisible net of tension descending over the group. Then, like a wraith, a Deimos appeared in the distance, more following behind. The aliens came on cautiously and well spaced out, clearly wary of an ambush. They were still some distance away when the lead Deimos froze and stared hard in the direction of the large mass of sticks, logs, and other flood debris that concealed the waiting Terra Nova. Waters watched the alien, feeling its gaze, trying to penetrate the concealment that hid him and the surrounding assault troops. Waters tightened his grip on his personal weapon, an ASBR-104, the SAW, or squad automatic weapon, version of the standard ASBR-103 assault rifle. The upgrade to make the standard rifle capable of sustained supporting fire, effectively a light machine gun, including a heavier barrel and enlarged magazine capacity. Abruptly, the lead Deimos snarled, its wide mouth showing its teeth, and threw up its weapon. Waters didn't recall either squeezing the trigger or giving the order to fire, but his ASBR-104 roared in his hands, and with a splash of yellowish blood, the Deimos crumpled to the ground. Around him, the others also opened fire, but the Deimos reacted fast, and most went to ground unscathed, avoiding the hail of fire directed at them. As the Deimos hit the ground, they began returning fire, the river channel becoming thick with lethal red and blue projectiles. From his position, Stalker heard the outbreak of sustained firing and activated the commnet. Iron Horse, this is Alpha 2-1. Sit rep over. This is Iron Horse. We're engaged with 50-plus tangos. Say again 5-0. Enemy moving to flank over. All received Iron Horse. Keep them pinned while we sweep right. We're on our way. 2-1 out. Waters picked himself back up and groped for his weapon, ignoring the licks of red flashing all around him. As he stood up, lumps of earth fell off his armor, the rocket that had slammed into the riverbank and knocked him off his feet, having coated him in lumps of heavy clay soil. He spied his weapon half buried, and grabbing the butt, dragged it free and checked the action. Satisfied it was clear, he fired a quick burst down the channel before scrambling up the side of the bank and dropping down next to a prone figure. Waters rolled the unit commander over, but the energy round had punched clean through his visor, and thick viscous blood was dribbling from the smoking hole. Waters swore, realizing there was nothing that could be done for him. The firefight had raging for several furious minutes, and some of the Deimos had now forced their way out of the river channel. Using the grass and uneven ground as cover, they were advancing on both sides of the bank, trying to reach the handful of defenders. As they closed, the assault troops began to hurl hand grenades, having long since used up their ammunition for their M503 grenade launchers. In reply, the Deimos warriors responded with grenades of their own, their small plasma-type grenades going off with bright, blinding flashes and powerful concussion waves that flattened the grass. A Deimos plasma grenade went off close, and Waters was thrown flat. As he sat upright, a Deimos warrior that had been crawling stealthily forward unseen rushed him. The lanky alien moved with blurring speed and swung its long energy rifle like a club, the butt of the weapon catching the CIO across the side of the face. As he lay, dazed, Waters saw the alien draw a twin-bladed knife from a sheath its thigh. He began to feel for his ASBR, but his hand touched nothing but hard earth, the weapon having been knocked clear. The Deimos drew back its arm, preparing to thrust the wicked-looking blades into his face. Then abruptly it was snapped around, yellowish blood spraying from its shoulder. As if fell a second round impacted, this one tearing through the alien's jaw and turning its face into a shattered mess. Around him the sound of impulse fire suddenly increased. Then after a moment the sound of firing swept over him and began to move further away. Moments later, a suited Terra Nova assault trooper appeared at his side. Waters looked up to see the unmistakable form of Link, his long eliminator rifle held at the ready position. Still unsteady, Waters tried awkwardly to stand. A hand appeared, and he gratefully grasped it and was dragged to his feet. "Can't fight hand-to-hand sitting on your behind, Waters. I thought you CIO types were supposed to be smart." Waters focused on Link, almost visualizing the smirk hidden behind the black skull-faced helmet. "You're lucky I can barely stand, or I would put you on your behind, specialist," Waters growled. Link laughed. "Now that I believe." Waters glanced down at the body of the unit commander. Link's voice became serious. "We'll collect him after Lee. I think he will understand." "We will," he would. Without another word, Waters glanced around and picked up his rifle, then headed unsteadily towards the direction of the firing. Link watched him go, then after a last look over the shattered riverbank set off after him. The remaining Deimos, when hit from the right, had tried to withdraw back up the river channel, but had run into a reinforced unit Stalker had sent to block their escape. Boxed in on three sides in the channel, the only avenue of escape left open had been to leave the channel for the dubious safety of the open ground of the opposite bank. Those who tried were quickly cut down by accurate fire as they scrambled up the steep bank, while those who remained in the channel were quickly silenced by the combination of 50mm grenades and fire from the commanding elevated position of the riverbank. The battle had been short and sharp, none of the Deimos warriors surviving their attempts to break out of the trap. Stalker leant against a tree and watched as the first light tactical transports, LTTs, came and loaded with medics from the 76th Infantry to take away the wounded and the dead. Nearby, the bodies of 5 of his men lay in state, while around them a dozen wounded were receiving treatment. Most were only minor, however, and would return to duty within days, including the CIO, Waters having received a fractured jaw. "It was worth it, all this." Stalker glanced across at Link and just nodded. Link always seemed to know what was on Stalker's mind. It had been worth it. Over 60 Deimos had been caught and killed in the sweep, and the Deimos base of operations in the region had been overrun by the elements of the 76th. The operation had resulted in valuable intelligence information about the continuing Deimos presence on Earth being captured, information that could save countless lives. Stalker sighed, and yet still more of his men were dead, more names for an already long list. That not all Deimos forces had been withdrawn from Earth had been discovered very soon after the defeat of the Deimos fleet above the planet. Sighting and reports of Deimos activity had come in from many areas and across all continents. At first it had been assumed that these had simply represented forces abandoned in the rush to abandon the attack on Earth. The truth, however, when revealed, proved to be much more complex. Well-equipped Deimos units, rarely larger than 50 strong, were identified in regions that had played no part in the ground campaign. Indeed, many of them seemed focused in the planet's most remote and unpopulated regions. Efforts to track these incursions have been made more difficult by the lack of sensor data during the period of the invasion due to the loss of much of Earth's extensive satellite reconnaissance network. This meant effectively starting from scratch and investigating every report of Deimos activity, a task made harder by the levels of Deimos paranoia, which saw every strange sound or light reported as Deimos activity planet-wide. Despite the difficulty, the assault divisions had answered the challenge and deployed strike teams to work with local forces to sweep for Deimos. The bulk of UEA forces being busily engaged in rebuilding the defenses of Earth in case of another sudden Deimos assault. The current operation had been launched after landowners in the region reported strange sightings, and most notable of all, the regular disappearance of cattle. This had culminated when a young worker out checking perimeter fencing on a remote rural property reported a clear sighting of Deimos. This had prompted a closer look at the region, and a deep recon team from the 76th Infantry Division was dispatched to scout the area. After a week in the field, they located clear evidence of Deimos activity, and the Terra Nova was called in to assist in a search and destroy operation. Stalker watched as the bodies of his fallen were carried away. Sometimes the destroy and search and destroy works both ways. You say something, boss? Stalker glanced at Link, who stood nearby. Nothing, Link. We're done here. The locals can handle it from now on. Get the lads loaded up. Link nodded and began barking orders to the nearby waiting unit commanders. Another battle was over. More blood had been split, but it was only a tiny cog in a much larger machine. The wider war would go on. On the other side of the planet, one of the key players in prosecuting the war was working hard to ensure that the fighting would indeed go on, but he was pushing for a change of location. General Jacob de Veers walked like a man with a purpose. He strode through the hallways of the underground command center, not slowing as guards snapped to attention, his staff behind him hurrying to keep up. The long-serving head of the secretive intelligence branch, the eyes and ears of the UEL, De Veers was an enigma in human form, more myth than reality. Even many of those he was going to meet, and despite their high office, did not know his past. Even his age was a closely guarded secret. But all of them knew his unmistakable hard gray eyes and piercing stare. De Veers was on his way to give a briefing to a meeting of the UEL Security Council, the small handful of chosen men and women selected from the High Council to shape UEL security and defense policy, and in doing so wield the power to wage war and shape the destiny of billions. As he reached the entrance to the meeting room, De Veers abruptly paused to examine a golden gilded display case mounted on the wall outside the doors. The case contained a battered flag. The flag had been taken by the victorious forces of the UEL after the storming of the last enemy stronghold at the end of the long series of wars that unified Earth. As he examined the flag, De Veers noted the inscription plaque beneath it, the words reading, "In memory of the fallen, mine and yours. All that divided us was a flag. Now we are one." De Veers had, of course, seen it before. During his lifetime of service to the UEL, he had walked every corridor of the great fortress of Iceland, and with the aid of his photographic memory, he could hand-draw a map of the facility with ease. Now he used the presence of the display case as an excuse to pause and gather his thoughts, running through his presentation, what he would reveal to the council, and what he would keep hidden. 6 months had passed since the Deimos invasion fleet had been defeated, and since that time, Deimos activity in the home system had been non-existent, their remaining ships avoiding major action. Meanwhile, the warships of the UEF had probed no deeper than the core systems neighboring Earth. The missions resulting in several skirmishes with Deimos warships, but no major fleet engagements. De Veers knew from the vast amount of data collected by his countless agents, both human and electronic, that the Deimos attack on Earth itself had actually proved to be far less damaging than first feared. The Deimos battle plan had been one of shock and awe, relying on massive force at the point of impact combined with speed and fear to disorientate and shatter Earth's defenses. Many of Earth's largest and most well-defended military installations had only received minimal damage, while others, such as Iceland, been bypassed completely as they would have required powerful forces and, more importantly, time to capture. This pattern had been repeated in space, where Mars and the major UEF bases on Titan and the Moon had been bypassed and had survived virtually intact. The main damage had been to the sprawling civilian population centers across Earth, many of which had suffered heavy damage from the heavy ground fighting. The Deimos plan's major weakness had been that it was predicated on having a powerful fleet to limit the ability of the defenders to move large formations, and in so doing force the UEA to adopt a largely static defense that could be mopped up at leisure once an initial foothold had been secured. This had proved to be the plan's Achilles heel. The defeat in space of the Deimos fleet had forced an immediate end to the ground campaign and a rapid, chaotic retreat from Earth. For 6 months since the Deimos withdrawal, Earth had been further fortified, damage repaired, and its defense reorganized. The net result of this Herculean effort being that Earth's defenses and defenders, despite the damage inflicted, were now even stronger than they had been before the Deimos attack. With that in mind, De Veers knew that soon the time would come to honor the chairman's promise that he had made to the people of Earth, a promise to eject the Deimos from human space and to eliminate the threat to Earth, no matter the cost. De Veers frowned at the thought. The counteroffensive would take very careful planning and immense resources, both in terms of manpower and money, if it were to have any chance of success. Despite the complexity and the risks, it was a challenge that De Veers relished. De Veers turned from his apparent close scrutiny of the display case and nodded to the honor guard stationed either side of the heavily reinforced doors, the soldiers activating the door controls. As the doors opened with an almost inaudible hiss of compressed air, De Veers strode into the room. De Veers paused to take a sip from the glass of water before continuing, his mouth starting to dry after a full 45 minutes of talking. In conclusion, Senators, as I have just outlined, it is estimated that at least 1/3 of the Deimos fleet survived the engagement, along with a sizable proportion of their deployed ground forces. Although I must again stress that this is an estimate, and we have no accurate method of way of establishing their total remaining ground forces in the system. Intelligence gathered over the past few months shows that the Deimos have begun to dig in across many of the outer systems, although information is sketchy at best. We do know, however, that their fleet, in conjunction with some ground forces, are maintaining a buffer zone in the inner systems to both delay us and to keep our forces from interfering. Deimos are forces reliably confirmed as present in the Proxima Centauri, Alpha Centauri A and B, 61 Cygni A and B, and Groombridge 34A and B systems. They appear to be basing their fleet out of somewhere in the Kruger 60A and B systems, although the exact location remains unconfirmed. In short, Senators, they are not leaving, they aim to stay. Like hell they will, growled one of the Senators. De Veers glanced at the seated senator, one of the council's more hawkish members. The senator's intelligence branch file had revealed that his youngest son had been serving in the Crusaders' Assault Division at the time of its disappearance in the WX-Ursi Majori system. The apparent loss of his son, combined with his already fiery temperament, made the senator one of the loudest voices on the council, demanding swift retribution against the Deimos. My thoughts exactly, Senator, De Veers replied evenly. How long until we can switch to full offensive operations, General? De Veers switched his attention to the man seated at the head of the long table, the formidable former Senator for Planetary Defense, and now sitting UEL chairman. I spoke to the defense chiefs this morning. They assure me that the defense forces can be ready in as little as 3 months for a major expeditionary campaign. Where are the assault divisions? De Veers allowed himself a rare smile at the question. The question was the first asked by any experienced UEL politician when faced with a military problem. Before answering, De Veers glanced sideways at a figure standing next to the entrance, a tall warrior with broad shoulders dressed in an immaculate suit of green extreme environment armor that marked him out as a member of the Philistines Assault Division. If the TEN's representative at the meeting noticed the glance, he didn't show it. The Philistines battle commander remaining as motionless as a statue. Mr. Chairman, the 9 assault divisions present on Earth are widely scattered and have been engaged in constant operations since before the Deimos invasion of Earth. They have begun to rebuild their strength and are receiving priority access to recruits from other UDF formations being broken up or reorganized, but they are all under strength. I want them off the line to Veers. They will be needed for the coming campaign. They have earned a rest. See to it. They won't like it, sir. The chairman frowned. Who? The divisions or the defense chiefs? De Veers concealed another smile, Both, Mr. Chairman.